Thank you, and welcome to the Library of Congress. The area I direct, the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement, is responsible for much of the literary programming at the library. Most notably, we plan and organize the annual National Book Festival, which turns 20 this year. On August 29th at the Washington Convention Center, we will present the biggest and best book festival in our history. I hope to see you there. Quick question, how many of you have been to the National Book Festival? Wonderful, thank you. How many of you have been to these National Book Festival Presents events? Great, thank you, keep coming back. It's your love of the National Book Festival that inspired us to develop this new series, the National Book Festival Presents. It's a way for you to continue to hear from and be inspired by some of the world's top writers. I do want to give a shout out to our literary director, Marie Arana, who is watching this program from Peru. Hi, Marie. The authors on board for tonight's program have themselves been inspired by a woman who was as fearless as she was celebrated for her inexorable dedication to expanding and strengthening civil rights in America. Rosa Parks may be best known for refusing to relinquish her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, but she did much more than that. She spent a lifetime battling inequality, and she left us an extraordinary collection of writings which illuminate the era and tell us much about her own dedication to justice. I am pleased and honored to tell you that 3 members of the Rosa Parks family are here. Her cousin Jeff Williamson and his wife Angela Williamson and their son Noel. Will you please stand so we can recognize you? Thank you for coming tonight. The Library of Congress is proud to be the repository for the Rosa Parks collection in our manuscript division, where her collection is housed alongside the papers of such notable Americans as Thurgood Marshall, those of 23 US presidents, and the largest assemblage in our collection, the papers of the NAACP. Our current major exhibition in this building, Rosa Parks, in her own words, showcases rarely seen materials that offer an intimate view of Parks and document her life and activism, creating a rich opportunity for viewers to discover new dimensions to their understanding of this seminal figure. If you haven't already, I urge you to see this once-in-a-lifetime exhibition. The exhibit is accompanied by this book, Rosa Parks in Her Own Words, which was just published by the library, and it's available at loc.gov and in our sales shop as well. Some of you viewed the exhibit before taking your seats. If you did, I hope you had a chance to visit our By the People transcription stations to contribute directly to Rosa Parks' legacy by transcribing her writings and her archives. If not, you can still participate in this crowdsourcing initiative by going online at crowd.loc.gov, where you can help transcribe letters written to Abraham Lincoln, the writings of leaders of the women's suffrage movement, and Clara Barton's diaries. It's really cool. I recommend doing it. Finally, I want to encourage you to attend our next National Book Festival Presents event on March 12th, when the great Margaret Atwood, writer of The Handmaid's Tale and other prescient novels, appears with her longtime editor, the legendary Nan Talese. It's a unique opportunity to learn what goes on between an editor and the author before a groundbreaking book lands in your hands. It is now my pleasure to introduce Adrienne Cannon, the Afro-American History and Culture Specialist in our manuscript division. Adrienne played a critical role in curating our Rosa Parks exhibition, and she is deeply knowledgeable about the library's extraordinary collection of African American history. Please welcome Adrienne Cannon.
Good evening. In 1926, Carter G. Woodson inaugurated Negro History Week to popularize the study of Black history. Negro History Week, which encompassed the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, was extended to Black History Month in February 1976. Rosa Parks was born in February. She is celebrated in Black history as the mother of the modern civil rights movement in the United States. She was an early activist in the Montgomery Voters League, which helped African Americans register to vote. The 2020 Black History Month theme is African Americans and the Vote. Parks also promoted the study of Black history in schools, at the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development, and as a board member of the Detroit branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the organization that Carter G. Woodson founded in 1915. And so, it is entirely fitting that the Library of Congress hosts a program about Rosa Parks in February 2020. Rosa Parks, in her own words, is the first major exhibition of the Rosa Parks Collection. The Rosa Parks Collection spans 140 years of family history and consists of approximately 10,000 items that document Parks' heartaches and triumphs, her everyday life, her activism, and her legacy. The collection reveals a more complex human portrait of what we think is a familiar, iconic figure. Included are personal correspondence, letters from presidents, fragmentary drafts of her writings, financial and medical records, political documents and ephemera, her Presidential Medal of Freedom and Congressional Gold Medal, additional honors and awards, presentation albums, drawings by school children, and hundreds of cards thanking her for her work. Family papers include correspondence with her husband Raymond Parks, her mother Leona McCauley, and her brother Sylvester McCauley. The photographs reflect Parks' lifelong commitment to social justice and human rights, her dedication to family, and her work with children. The books cover a broad range of subjects and include presentation copies signed by Martin Luther King Jr., her attorney Fred Gray, Alex Haley, John O. Killens, and Deepak Chopra. The Rosa Parks Collection is an important addition to the library's resources for the study of the 20th century civil rights movement, which include the vast records of the NAACP, the National Urban League, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, as well as the personal papers of Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, James Foreman, and Mary Church Terrell. The collection was placed on loan with the library in 2014 and became a permanent gift in 2016 through the generosity of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation. Librarian of Congress James Billington announced the loan agreement at a preview event of the library's civil rights exhibition, The Civil Rights Act of 1964, A Long Struggle for Freedom, on September the 9th, 2014. The news eclipsed coverage of other events in the library for several months. The Rosa Parks collection generated more favorable publicity for the library than any acquisition in recent history. The library opened the collection to researchers on February the 4th, 2015, to commemorate Rosa Parks' birthday. About 24 items from the collection were on display in 3 glass cases in the Jefferson Building through the month of March 2015. In addition, 3 items were incorporated into the Civil Rights Act of 1964 exhibition. In February 2016, the library placed online a digitized edition of the collection to maximize access to the public. Shortly after Carla Hayden was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress in September 2016, I introduced her to the Rosa Parks collection. The sampling of items I presented made a strong impression. Dr. Hayden felt that the library had to share the collection with the public for a much broader view. Thus, Rosa Parks, in her own words, was launched. The fundraising proposal for the exhibition was completed in the spring of 2017. Rosa Parks, in her own words, is made possible by the support of the Ford Foundation, the Catherine B. Reynolds Foundation, with additional support from AARP, History, Joyce and Thomas Moorhead, and the Capital Group. The following spring, I drew up a preliminary list of items for conservation review and approval. One of my objectives in selecting the items was to show the variety of materials and formats represented in the collection. I began writing the item labels, the introductory text, and the section text in the summer of 2018. Development on the physical exhibition began in September 2018. I joined other members of the exhibition team in weekly or bi-weekly planning meetings with the designer and filmmakers at Upswell. The exhibition opened on December the 5th, 2019, the 64th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. The boycott, a pivotal event in the civil rights movement, was sparked by Rosa Parks' refusal to vacate her seat to a white man on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, December the 1st, 1955. The exhibition moves beyond that single celebrated act of civil disobedience to tell the full story of Rosa Parks, the seasoned, lifelong activist and the woman behind the civil rights icon. The story unfolds in 4 sections which explore Rosa Parks' early life and activism, the Montgomery bus boycott, the negative effects of her arrest on her family and their move to Detroit, and the global impact of her life. The sections are covered with a floral wallpaper. The rose-colored floral motif printed on the wallpaper was taken from a sweater Parks wore in a well-known photograph. To tell the story, the exhibition draws extensively from the Rosa Parks collection. Personal writings and photographs predominate, but you will also discover ID badges, political buttons, children's drawings, her Presidential Medal of Freedom and her Congressional Gold Medal, a church bulletin, and a pair of shoelaces. The family Bible, with a register that partially charts Parks' maternal lineage, is on display for the first time. Supplemental materials are drawn from the NAACP records, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porter records, the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, and the Prints and Photographs Division. The storyteller is Rosa Parks. Parks' words are represented in the exhibition by examples of her personal writings on display, in quotes from those personal writings, and her book, Quiet Strength, printed on the wall panels that introduce each section, in the exhibition's 6 unique looping films, and in the prints of artist Amos P. Kennedy, Jr. The exhibition immerses visitors in these various representations of Rosa Parks' words, as well as photographs she accumulated throughout her life, allowing her to tell her own story. The exhibition will be on view in the Jefferson Building South Gallery through August 2020. And I encourage all of you, if you've seen it for the first time, to come back and to invite your friends, and for those who are in the DC area, to please visit the exhibition and the Library of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne, for your enlightening look at the life of Rosa Parks and the exhibition. And I do want to say that even when the exhibit closes, you can still see the collection. You just need to get a reader's card. Our next speaker is a distinguished professor of political science at Brooklyn College and a scholar of African American history, Jean Theoharis. is the author of The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, which received the 2014 NAACP Image Award and the 2013 Letitia Woods Brown Award from the Association of Black Women Historians. It was also named one of the 25 best academic titles of 2013 by Choice magazine. Her book, A More Beautiful and Terrible History, The Uses and Misuses of Civil Rights History, won the 2018 Brooklyn Public Library Literary Prize for Nonfiction. She has published widely on the civil rights and Black power movements, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Nation, The Atlantic, Slate, Salon, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. Please welcome Jean Theoharis.
Good evening. It is a tremendous honor to be here. And Rosa Parks was honored in so many ways over the course of her life, but in some ways there is no more fitting honor to her, to someone who spent her life insisting that African American history had to be at the center of American history, that it needed to be taught in every classroom, than to have her papers here at the Library of Congress. So I'm tremendously grateful to the Howard Buffett Foundation and to the library because, again, I mean, Rosa Parks got a presidential medal, she got a congressional, but this honor really, I think, speaks to who she was. So when Rosa Parks died in 2005, she became the first woman ever, the first civilian ever, to lie in honor in the US Capitol. 40,000 Americans came to pay their respects here. President Bush laid a wreath at her coffin. It was an epic honor. And yet, how she was honored got smaller and smaller. She was incessantly referred to as quiet, not angry, quiet, soft-spoken, quiet, humble, quiet. And her contributions really were reduced to that one day on the bus in December 1st, 1955. It became an event in many ways to paper over a much more uncomfortable event that had happened 2 months earlier, which was the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. And then Hurricane Katrina had raised questions about persistent racial and social inequality in the United States. And this funeral for the mother of the civil rights movement became a way to show a much more positive image of American progress. Look, this woman who had been denied a seat on the bus was now laying in the Capitol. Look at our progress. The New York Times eulogized her as the accidental matriarch of the civil rights movement. Now, Rosa Parks spent her life saying that this was not just a one-day thing for her, that she had a life history of being rebellious. And to the end of her life, she was insistent there was a lot more work to be done. And so what I wanted to do tonight in my time was to basically give us a sense of that life history of being rebellious. She's born in 1913 in Tuskegee, and she grows up with her mother and her grandparents, and very much her feisty spirit begins at home. She talks about one of her first memories after World War I. There's an uptake of white violence against returning black soldiers. It's often referred to as Red Summer. And there is an uptake of Klan violence in Pine Level where they are living. And her grandfather is a political man. He's a supporter of Marcus Garvey, and he decides he's going to sit out on their porch with his gun to protect their family home. And a 6-year-old Rosa sits with him many nights. She insists on sitting with him because, as she puts it, she wants to see him shoot a Ku Kluxer. So this is, I think, a different place to start, like, our story of her, right? She is a lifelong believer in self-defense that she gets at home. She is shy, but she has a feisty side, and she's very protective of her younger brother. And one time, a white bully is threatening them, and finally, she picks up a brick. This is a preteen Rosa Parks, and she basically threatens the bully back. And then she comes home and she tells her grandma about it. And her grandma's furious and terrified and basically says to her, "You're going to be lynched before you're grown, and you can't talk like that." And you can imagine this preteen Rosa Parks, basically she feels so angry, she's so betrayed. Hear her grandmother saying this, and she's like, "I'd rather be lynched than not be able to say I don't like it." To have to be pushed around, and we're going to hear this language come back. But her political life, I think, really begins when she meets and falls in love with a politically active barber named Raymond Parks. This is 1931. And Raymond Parks is working on the Scottsboro case, right? Scottsboro, 9 young men riding the rails, young black men riding the rails. They basically have a fight with some white boys on the train. The white boys go get some cops, and these 9 black teenagers are arrested. But as they're being arrested, 2 white women are found in the train also riding the rails, and that charge is quickly changed to rape. And those 9 young men are arrested, quickly tried, and all but the youngest, who's 12, sentenced to death. And a local movement grows in Alabama to try to protect and defend the Scottsboro boys from being executed. And one of the local activists working on that movement is Raymond Parks. And she will describe him as the first real activist I ever met, because I think in Raymond, she begins to take this spirit that had grown at home and see the possibility of collective challenge. They get married the next year in 1932, and she will join him in this Scottsboro work. Now, in the first years of their marriage, he is the much more public activist, and she's more behind the scenes. That will change over the course of their lives, and he will become more behind the scenes supporting her, and she will become the more public activist. That Scottsboro work is dangerous. She talks about late night meetings, guns on the table. Even to have a meeting is dangerous. Now, by the 1940s, she's wanting to become even more active. It's World War II. Her own brother, Sylvester, is serving overseas in the Pacific. And she's frankly galled that here we have black people fighting to protect the United States and yet cannot register to vote at home. And she wants to register to vote. And she sees a picture in a local black newspaper of a local NAACP meeting, and she says she realizes that women can be part of the branch. And so she goes to her first NAACP meeting in 1943. She's the only woman there. She's asked to take notes. She says, "Too timid to say no." She says yes. And then it's branch election day, and they ask her to be secretary, and again, too timid to say no. She's elected secretary that very first day. Now, she makes it known that she wants to register to vote. And a man by the name of E.D. Nixon, one of Montgomery's most stalwart activists, comes by her apartment. The Parks family are living in the Cleveland Courts projects. And he comes by their apartment to bring her the materials to register to vote. And here will begin a partnership that's going to change the face of American history. Because E.D. Nixon and Rosa Parks will spend the next decade transforming the Montgomery NAACP into a much more activist chapter. And they're working on a couple of different things. The first is voter registration. She tries for the first time in 1943 to register to vote, right? One of the barriers is a test. The test is given differently to white people than to black people. Black people are given very obscure questions about the state constitution, or very absurd questions like how many bubbles are in a bar of soap. The first time she tries, she does not pass, 1943. She tries again in 1944. Again, she does not pass. 1945, she tries again. And this time, she's fed up. And she decides she's going to write down all of the questions and all of the answers that she puts down because she's thinking of filing suit. Now, where we are in history, this is 10 years before her historic bus stand, but that tenacity is evident. And the voter registrar notices what she's doing and doesn't want any trouble. And so lo and behold, Rosa Parks is informed that she has successfully registered to vote. That tenacity, again, that we're going to see over and over. Raymond never succeeds in Montgomery, right? They make it very hard. But so she votes for the first time in 1945. And so one of the things the Montgomery NAACP is working on is voter registration and trying to get more people to at least try to and press against the system. And the other kinds of issues they're working on is what we would call now criminal justice issues. Two kinds. One, like Scottsboro, cases where black people and often black men are being wrongfully accused of crimes. One of the cases that guts her the most is the case of a 16-year-old by the name of Jeremiah Reeves. Jeremiah Reeves was a high school student. He was a jazz drummer. He delivered groceries for work, and he had started to have a relationship with a young white woman. It got found out. She accused him of rape. He was brought in. They put him in the electric chair. It has a kind of, there's a way that it sort of resembles the Central Park 5 case. They put him in the electric chair, and they basically coerce him into confessing. He recants the confession. He also is quickly sentenced to death. Parks and Nixon, they fight this case for years. They managed to get it overturned because it was an all-white jury. A second all-white jury convicts Reeves again, and Reeves is executed when he turns 22. The other kinds of cases they're working on is trying to get the law to be responsive and accountable to black people, and particularly kind of white violence against black people and white rape of black women. Many of us heard Oprah a couple years ago at the Golden Globes talking about the Recy Taylor case, a case of a black woman who was coming home from church and 6 white men gang raped her and told her if she told anybody they would kill her, but she did tell. And through the networks of the Scottsboro organizing, the Parks come to learn about this case. And she goes down, Rosa Parks goes down to investigate, and a movement is built to try to get justice for Recy Taylor, to try to get an indictment of the men who raped her. There's never an indictment. And in fact, for a time, Parks and Nixon have to get Recy Taylor out of Abbeville to Montgomery because her life is in danger. So over and over and over, and there are a lot more cases I could talk about, they're trying, and by and large, they are not succeeding. And she talks about how it was hard to keep going when all our efforts seemed in vain. Now, by 1954, she has been hired to work at Montgomery Fair Department Store. Montgomery Fair Department Store is a segregated department store. That means that black people can shop there, but they cannot try on clothes. It means that for black people working there, the elevator is segregated, the water fountain is segregated, the employee lunchroom is segregated. And she's an assistant tailor in the men's shop, which means that she spends her time tailoring white men's suits. And to make money on the side, she is doing sewing on the side, including for one of Montgomery's few white families that's very kind of active in civil rights, and that is Clifford and Virginia Durr. Clifford is a lawyer. Virginia Durr is a longtime civil rights activist. And Virginia Durr is affiliated with an adult organizer training school called Highlander Folk School. And Virginia Durr sees how low Mrs. Parks' spirits have gotten. And she recommends her for a scholarship to go to Highlander Folk School. Highlander Folk School in the summer of 1955 will have a 2-week workshop on how to implement desegregation, right, in the wake of the Brown case. And she recommends Rosa Parks. And this is a big deal for a working class person like Rosa Parks to take off 2 weeks of work, but she goes. And it's a transformative experience. She talks about how the workshop she goes to is about 50 people, about half black and half white. She talks about it as one of the first times she felt like she could express her political ideas in front of white people without hostility. One of her favorite things about Highlander is that she would wake up in the morning and she would smell the coffee, and white people would be making it for her. And she just loves the matter-of-factness of it. Highlander was started in the 1930s around issues in the Great Depression. And by the 1950s, they've turned to civil rights. They've always been in interracial space. And reporters would come down to, it was located in Tennessee, and would talk to Miles Horton, one of the founders, and they would say to him, how do you get white people and black people to eat together? And he said, you know, this is what we do. First, we make the food. Second, we put the food out. Third, we ring the bell. And I think part of what she loved about this was the kind of pointing out of the absurdity of it. She's also incredibly impressed. The workshop she's going to is being led by Septima Clark. Septima Clark was a longtime teacher, activist in South Carolina who had lost her job because she refused to give up her membership in the NAACP. And so Clark is running the workshop that Parks is taking part in, and Parks is in awe of her, in part because Mrs. Parks feels so bitter. She says she feels so nervous, and here Clark seems so calm. And her spirits start to lift. But still in all, on the last day, like any good organizer training school, they do a go-around. What are you going to do when you get home? And they get to Rosa Parks, and Rosa Parks says, there's never going to be a mass movement in Montgomery because it's the cradle of the Confederacy. White resistance is too violent, and black people won't stick together. This is 4 months before her bus stand. But she says, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to continue to work with the young people. The year before, she had refounded the youth branch of the chapter. Rosa Parks, across her life, held out her greatest hope for the kind of militancy of young people. Right? She often despaired of the complacency, and she would use this word over and over, of her peers. And so what she leaves Highlander more resolved to work with these young people. All right, we're to December 1st, 1955. Now, this is not going to be Rosa Parks' first bus resistance. One of the things she refused to do, many bus drivers in Montgomery, and remember, Montgomery bus drivers had police powers, which meant they carried guns. And some bus drivers would insist that black people pay in the front, but then reboard from the back. And she refused to do that. She had been kicked off the bus by the bus driver who was going to have her arrested that night 12 years earlier, and she'd been kicked off other buses for refusing to do this. Now, she is also not the first person to get arrested for, refusing to move on the bus. There had been a trickle of people in Montgomery, particularly in the decade after World War II. Viola White gets arrested in 1944. She decides to press her case. In response, police rape her daughter. And then they do this tricky maneuver where they hold up her appeal in state court, and it never gets heard, and Viola White dies before her case goes anywhere. And Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon are working on that case. In 1950, a neighbor of Rosa Parks says Hilliard Brooks refuses that practice. He refuses to get out and reboard. He has an argument with the bus driver. The police get on the bus, and they shoot Hilliard Brooks, and he dies. He is a neighbor of Rosa Parks at Cleveland Courts. Now, 1955, it's a new legal climate. We're after Brown, and so there's a potential for a legal case. And in March, a 15-year-old by the name of Claudette Colvin refuses to give up her seat on the bus, is manhandled by police as they take her from the bus. She struggles because they have their hands all over her. They book her on 3 charges of a segregation charge, a resisting arrest charge, and an assault charge. The judge strategically throws out the segregation charge and the resisting charge, making it much harder because the black community of Montgomery was outraged by Colvin's arrest. But then people start to feel like she's too young, she's too feisty, she's too uncontrollable, she's poor, she's dark-skinned, and she is not the right image. And so we don't see a mass movement ultimately behind Colvin, although I think there is no way to understand what's going to happen when Rosa Parks get arrested without understanding that Colvin really lays the ground for that accumulation of outrage. Movements don't happen with the first injustice, as we know, right? It takes an accumulation. Okay, so now we're at December 1st, 1955. She gets on the bus around 5:30 at night. She'd actually let a bus pass because it was too crowded. She sits in the middle section. She's sitting here, there's a black man sitting here, and 2 black women sitting over here. At the 3rd stop after she gets on, the bus fills. 1 white man is left standing. By the terms of Alabama segregation, everyone in that row is going to have to get up so that 1 person can sit down. The first time the bus driver asks, no one moves. The bus driver asks more threateningly the second time, and she says reluctantly. The other people decide to get up, but she pushed, again, this language of being pushed as far as she could be pushed. She says she thinks about her grandfather, she thinks about Emmett Till and the recent acquittal of his killers, and she decides not to move. To her, to get up would be to approve of this treatment, and she did not approve. Now, every school child in America today learns that Rosa Parks was courageous. But what makes this courageous, I think we really miss in the telling of this story, and that is the courage of perseverance. There is nothing to suggest, I should say, she's made stands before. People she's known have made stands before, and they haven't done anything. And they often have resulted in people getting hurt or fired, which she's going to get fired, right? So there's nothing to suggest that doing this thing on that day is going to make a difference, right? And yet, and still, this is in some sense the genius of Rosa Parks' courage, the ability to do something again and again and again when you don't necessarily see that it's going to work, and yet you still do it, right? Because a line is a line. Now, Rosa Parks is a shy person, but on the bus that day, she is not quiet. The police get on the bus. They ask her, why didn't you move? And she says, why do you push us around? You can imagine the scene, right? And one of the officers is so surprised. He says, well, I don't know, but the law is the law and you're under arrest, right? So again, we can imagine the scene. She's taken to jail. She actually meets a woman in jail who's been there for 60 days because she picked up a machete against an abusive boyfriend, and she doesn't want to get back with the boyfriend, and they haven't allowed her to make a call to her family. And Rosa Parks smuggles that woman's brother's phone number out of jail that night. So she's thinking like an activist even that night. She's bailed out about 10 o'clock, both by her husband and E.D. Nixon. And once E.D. Nixon sees that she's okay, he's kind of delighted, because here's the test case they have been looking for. Rosa Parks is 42 that night. She's active in the community. She's politically active. They know she's brave. And here is the test case they've been looking for. Now, Raymond is not so sure. Raymond is worried she will be killed. And Raymond is also worried that people won't stick with her like they didn't stick with Colvin. Because the only adult, in fact, that sticks with Colvin that summer is Rosa Parks. But they decide to go forward. And she calls a young black lawyer in town by the name of Fred Gray to ask him to represent her. And Fred Gray was here the night that they opened the exhibition. People were here for that. He was 25 that night. And she asked him to represent her. And even later that night, he calls the head of the Women's Political Council, a woman by the name of Joanne Robinson. And it is the Women's Political Council that night that decides they are going to call for a one-day boycott on Monday when she's arraigned in court. And so in the middle of the night, Robinson sneaks into Alabama State College and with the help of 2 students and a colleague runs off 35,000 leaflets saying, another woman has been arrested on the bus, boycott on Monday. And she calls Nixon in the middle of the night to tell him, and early that next morning, he starts calling the more political ministers in town. And about 6 a.m., he calls a new minister in town, and this is a 26-year-old Martin Luther King. The Kings had been in town about a year, and they had just had their first daughter, Yolanda. She is 3 weeks old. And Nixon wakes King up. And just like us, when somebody wakes you up with a scheme at 6 in the morning because Nixon wants to use King's church, like most of us, King is like, actually, could you call me back? And I say that because I think sometimes the way we tell the story of Parks and King makes it seem like they know their name is in neon, they know what to do, God is talking to them with lightning, when there is no lightning. There is nothing. Right? There's nothing easy, there is nothing obvious, and we know that King in the next days and weeks and months is going to step into this amazing leadership, but there is nothing obvious about it. And he says, call me back, and Nixon calls him back a couple hours later, and he says, yes, you can use my church, and Nixon says, okay, great, I've been telling people to meet there anyways. Now that Monday morning, people like Rosa Parks and Raymond Parks are very nervous, right? Many of Montgomery's longtime activists are very nervous. Will people stay off the bus? And she talks about that Monday morning as being the best part of the whole thing, right? The Montgomery bus boycott would go on for over a year. But seeing that people had done it, and she wondered, she thought it was magnificent, but why had we waited so long? Now, many times people think about the Montgomery bus boycott as being about walking, but in fact, how they sustain a year-long boycott is by this amazingly organized carpool system where they set up 40 stations all around town. And at the height of it, they're giving 10 to 15,000 rides a day. But that requires money and resources. Now, for Rosa Parks, 5 weeks into the boycott, she's fired. She says people don't talk to her at work ever again. She's fired 5 weeks in. Raymond loses his job a couple weeks later, and they will never find steady work in Montgomery ever again. And I think this is part of the story we do not tell. And it is a part that if you look at her papers and you look at the exhibition, right, one of the hardest things in her papers is how profound the suffering is for her and Raymond and her mother for a decade following her bus stand. But even though her own family's in trouble, she will spend much of the Montgomery bus boycott on the road raising money and attention for the movement back home. The Montgomery's buses are desegregated in part because they file a federal case like alongside Rosa Parks' state case, learning from the Viola White case. That case goes to the Supreme Court, and on December 21st, 1956, Montgomery's buses are desegregated. But that doesn't end the Parks family suffering, that doesn't end the death threats. And so 8 months after the boycott's successful end, the Parks family is forced to leave Montgomery and they move to Detroit, where her brother is living. And if you knew that she lived in Detroit, oftentimes the way that story is told, it's like, and then they moved to Detroit and they lived happily ever after, like there's some, like this is the promised land. But Rosa Parks will talk and describe Detroit as the northern promised land that wasn't. Because even though some of the public signs of segregation are gone, thankfully, she says, the systems of housing segregation, school segregation, job discrimination, and police brutality that they leave in Montgomery, they find again in Detroit. She finds not too much difference, to use her words. And so she will spend the second half of her life, she spends more of her life in Detroit than in Montgomery, fighting the racism of the Jim Crow North, in and alongside a growing Black Power movement in the city and in the country. Because again, I think too often we truncate Rosa Parks' story. The bus boycott is successfully over, and that's the end of her story, when the actual Rosa Parks will spend another 40 years fighting for criminal justice, fighting against police brutality, fighting for real public assistance and public housing, because public housing had been so important to her. She's an early opponent in the war in Vietnam. She's an opponent of US policy in Central America in the 1980s. She fights against kind of US investment in South Africa. She keeps going and going and going. She will describe Malcolm X as her personal hero. And I did a lot of interviews for my book, and I interviewed one of Malcolm X's lieutenants, a man by the name of Peter Bailey. If you're watching the Netflix, he's in the Netflix show right now. And Mr. Bailey said to me that Malcolm talked about two people in the civil rights movement with complete awe. And one of them was Fannie Lou Hamer, and the other was Rosa Parks. So they meet for the first time in 1963, when he comes to Detroit to give the message to the grassroots. And they actually meet for the last time about a week before he's assassinated. He comes back, gives an address at Ford Auditorium. It's often called his last message. Rosa Parks is there that night. She's getting an award. They have their longest conversation. She gets him to sign her program. And I think we see in that, and you will see pictures upstairs of her and Stokely Carmichael, and her and Shirley Chisholm, and her and Angela Davis, right? And this idea that courage needs courage, right? That like, part of the genius of someone like Rosa Parks is the ability to go to try thing after thing after thing, to keep going and going and going. But part of how that is sustained is by a community of activists. So she keeps going into the 80s, into the 90s. To the end of her life, she is insisting that there's much more work to be done, that the struggle is not over, that we need to carry it forward. And so I guess where I would like to end tonight is that a kind of much more fitting honor of Rosa Parks is by taking that struggle forward, right? And to resist the tendency to tell this like happy one-day story about her and honor her that way, but in fact, actually miss what she's asking of us. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Jean, for that extraordinary overview of Rosa Parks and for bringing her into the room with us tonight. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce two more guests who will be in conversation. Douglas Brinkley is a professor of history at Rice University, a contributing editor at Vanity Fair, and CNN's official historian. His recent books include Cronkite, The Quiet World, The Wilderness Warrior, and Rightful Heritage. 6 of his books have been selected as New York Times Notable Books of the Year. In 2005, he published Rosa Parks, A Life. He is a member of the Century Association and the Council on Foreign Relations, and an honorary member of the James Madison Council of the Library of Congress. His new book is An American Moonshot, John F. Kennedy and the Great Space Race. Most notably, for our purposes tonight, Doug was a friend of Rosa Parks' family and is amply equipped to tell us about the human side of this historic American figure. Douglas will be in conversation with National Public Radio's Michelle Martin, the weekend host of All Things Considered, where she draws on her deep reporting and interviewing experience to dig into the week's news. Outside the studio, she has also hosted Michelle Martin Going There, an ambitious live event series in collaboration with member stations. She came to NPR in 2006 and launched Tell Me More, a 1-hour daily NPR news and talk show that aired on NPR stations nationwide from 2007 to 2014. Prior to joining NPR, Michelle was a Washington Post reporter and White House correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. She is also an Emmy Award-winning reporter for Nightline. Please welcome Douglas Brinkley and Michelle Martin.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for having us follow Professor Theo Harris. I thought we were friends. It's wonderful to see all of you. It's wonderful to be in conversation with both of you. Let's pick up where Professor Theo Harris left off. Well, actually, let's actually go before Professor Theo Harris, because what I think she was trying to do, what she does, and what she's been doing in her work is create a different picture of Rosa Parks from the kind of the nicey-nice, you know, the one day, this was the one day she was tired, so she sat down, and then we all stood up, and then it was always happily ever after, kind of the fairy tale version. She's trying to recover the grit and the hardness of it from the fairy tale version that a lot of us have been taught, like the Black History Month poster version. But you're doing something else with your book. What were you trying to do with your book?
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be here with family members of Rosa Parks. It's an honor, and also people that knew Rosa Parks very well. H.H. Leonard's here. Where is H? There she is. H, we used to put up Mrs. Parks. When she would come to Washington, Mrs. Parks would stay at the mansion at DuPont Circle, and I went all over places where H was with Mrs. Parks, and they're very close, and what you did for her in her later life is quite remarkable. And Elaine Steele, but I'm not sure she's here. But hi, Elaine, if you're watching somewhere. My book came out on Rosa Parks in 2000, not 2005. And I was doing a class called the Magic Bus in the 1990s, where I'd take school kids on my bus, and we'd go all over the country studying American history and culture. And that evolved into me taking high school students on civil rights tours in the South. This is right up people like John Lewis's, and Julian Bond's wheelhouse, because I'd visit all the sites. And when I'd take these students to Montgomery back then and go to Cleveland Courts, there was no historic marker for Rosa Parks. So I would bring these students and bang on the door and go into the apartment, which was this desolate little tiny cubbyhole where Rosa and Raymond Parks lived those years, and just talk to the people that were living there at that point. And when you get to Montgomery, the proximity of things start making sense. The fact that, the Holt Street Baptist Church just down the road from where Rosa Parks' Cleveland Courts was and the like. It is called the Walking City because it was a place you could successfully do a boycott due to the mileage. It's 60,000 people, not 600,000 or 1 million in Atlanta or something. But the great thing so I decided to try to do a book on Rosa Parks. In this Viking series, when I pitched them, they had asked me to do a book and listen to the names of the people that are in this series. Leonardo da Vinci, Dante, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Buddha, Chekhov, Martin Luther King, Churchill, Andy Warhol. And I came to James Atlas, the editor, and I said, I want to do a book on Rosa Parks because there were great children's books out on her, but I didn't feel there was one that told the story of her more than the fairy tale of the one night, as you put it. And I embarked on this, and it was how I started knowing Elaine Steele was a gatekeeper. When Rosa Parks moved up to Detroit, she worked at a rag factory for a while with Elaine Steele, where they were making just garments out of a thing. She would have to take a bus in Detroit. We sometimes forget in our country that celebrity doesn't equal wealth. And, Rosa Parks was never a wealthy a person. She had to work her whole life to make a living. I wanted to do it, and I finally met Elaine at DuPont Circle Afterwards Cafe here and pitched myself to interview her and get to spend time with her. And Elaine let me feel that she wanted an African-American woman to be the one that wrote it. And she said, I love your work and all this. Well, I went back that evening to my room, and my phone rang, and Elaine said, okay, I didn't like my telling you that. We'll help you any way we could. And at that point, the people around Rosa Parks just sort of allowed me into her life to go to the AME Church in Detroit, or to an apartment overlooking the Detroit River in Windsor, to the Underground Railroad. I believe I was with you in Beverly Hills at one point with her, and Detroit and Montgomery with Johnny May Carr. And it was unbelievable for me because Rosa Parks had the deepest, most beautiful soul you could imagine. There was nothing not to like about her. And she exuded her Christian faith, the AME Church, the Freedom Church. That was the heart of who she was. That was the church of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth. And she was a deaconess much of her life in that. And she also loved the South. She loved Alabama as much as she despised Alabama, even when she was in Detroit, and many of her friends are there. So I found her to be the most remarkable person for all the reasons Jean said, in the fact that she was this activist but carried this dignity with her. And
let's dig into something you just said, though. Did you have any hesitation about being the one to tell her story, given that you are not an African-American woman?
No. Because I just loved, the more I learned about her, the more I felt she was undersung. And history is never static. Nobody's book owns anything. It's a building block to the point that you build till you get to the Library of Congress having a miraculous display like they're having here, and people really starting to understand her legacy. And also, I thought I might be able to be a phase, and the advantage of doing there are disadvantages of getting to know figures. The one advantage is you get to talk to them more and get to see them. Like with Rosa Parks, she had gotten into a very set deal about December 1, and to get her to deviate off script, she'd asked so many times, and we all tell the same story. So you show her things like a Montgomery newspaper where she'd see an orange soda, like, oh, we used to drink that, and you can get her into into getting off of just what everybody always asked
I
you?
learned a lot from your book, and in fact, it reminds me of Professor Theo Harris's title about one of her other books. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. I mean, there's just some wonderful stories that you tell, but there are also some terrible stories that you tell just about the basic indignities of life for a person of color and African-American women, African-Americans in general, African-American women in particular at that particular point. Like you pointed out that in Montgomery, there wasn't even a high school for African-Americans until 1946. And you talked about her sort of feisty early life. Remember the story about how she was walking down the street and this boy was on his roller skates and he pushed her and she pushed him back and his mother says to her, "I could have you locked up forever."
That's right.
I could have you locked up
And
forever.
that's
And she said, "I wasn't doing anything. Why did he push me?"
Well, and that's the side of Rosa Parks that surprised me. I asked a little bit what we just heard. I asked Rosa Parks once, I asked a very dumb question. I said something to the effect, well, not the first part wasn't dumb. I just wanted her to talk, and I said, when did you first meet Martin Luther King? And she said, the Pilgrim Insurance Company in Montgomery. And she said, just a group of us went, some of us from a church went, and we came to hear him speak. And very small group, a handful of women coming to hear it, and he was the new preacher in town. And I then said to her, Ms. Parks, did you realize he was like, this was a guy, when you heard him speak that day, that he was great? That this was going to be somebody to keep an eye on. And she looked at me with this funny look and said, we just kept saying, boy, is he cute. We finally have a cute preacher in town. And she was very human like that, and self-deprecating, and tell fun, warm-hearted stories. But on the idea of being bullied, later talking about King at one point, she told me about when she went to Birmingham. This was after the bus boycott of Montgomery. And Dr. King was giving a speech on stage, and a guy came out and punched Dr. King, a weird white supremacist type, but just obviously with some form of derangement, or you don't rush the stage and punch somebody. And King did this whole nonviolent thing. She told me, like, oh, leave him alone, don't grab him, don't grab him. And he started talking, why did you hit me? And it turned out that he was angry because Sammy Davis Jr., the entertainer, was with a white woman. The bigotry of it. And I said, well, then what happened? She goes, I went back and got him a Coke and aspirin, and we were looking to get ice on his face, and all Dr. King was saying is, I don't want charges pressed on him. I don't want him going to jail. And then Mrs. Parks said, I said, well, what did you think? That must have been amazing. She goes, I thought Martin's getting crazy with nonviolence. Because if somebody punched me in the face, I'll punch him right back. And she wasn't joking. She was not of that full-bred, nonviolent, somebody punches me, I'm not going to take it. Hence, it's when she's up in Detroit working with the Black Power movement and befriending Malcolm X and all, it was a natural fit for her. She only went so far on the King philosophy of constantly turning your cheek.
Well, you heard the story how she would sit next to her grandpa when he had his double-barreled shotgun on his lap, and she wanted to see him take care of business. So,
and she
was
wanted
not
us to remember Booker T. Washington. When we study as historians, it's usually W.E.B. Du Bois says, well, it should be. He's the great. But she was a beneficiary of Booker T. Washington in the sense of he was the person in Tuskegee and with the George Washington Carver and the book Up From Slavery of Booker T. Washington. But more to the point, he created, Booker T. Washington, these industrial schools in the South. And she went to the industrial school for girls in Montgomery, which was run by white people from liberals, really from the North. And that's when she was very proud that she actually graduated as an African American from school, and that when many were it was very hard to get an education if you were black in racist Alabama.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because she really did believe in what a lot of people today call respectability politics. I mean, she believed in being hardworking. She believed in, being very proper and correct. One of the things that, though, the other thing that I read in your book that I just wanted to clarify for people is you say that it really, crediting Professor Theo Harris's point that the groundwork had been laid, that people in Montgomery were already very angry about the way they were treated, the indignities large and small, the big systemic ones, the petty small ones. You say that definitively she really had not planned that day to do what she did on December 1st. It really was a spontaneous act, even though there was a lot of groundwork being laid.
Yeah, but we just heard a brilliant lecture about how Rosa Parks had, during World War II years, was, marrying Raymond in 1932, and the barbershop in the African-American community where they would start talking and working with the NAACP and gossiping about how to fight against Jim Crow and segregation and all of this. And then she worked to get African-American kids into the libraries of Montgomery, and we heard about the voting. So I'm just suggesting in the 40s, she was very active. Now, it was a misogynistic world. E.D. Nixon, amazing figure, but he was like, he'd carry a gun with him, and she was the secretary, but really she ran the Montgomery office. E.D. Nixon was out and about, not to detract from him, but she was keeping the show moving forward all the time. And so by the time of that December 1, the Virginia and Clifford Durr, white liberal couple, New Dealers. Clifford Durr had got a Rhodes Scholarship. They were Eleanor Roosevelt people. They had befriended Rosa Parks also, and they were the ones who helped pay her to go to Highlander Folk School and take the classes on civil disobedience. I felt one of my finds, I went to her papers, which are at Wayne State University, and she was a pack rat. She would save clippings of everything, of all the just endless files of clippings, but in the midst of all of that were her notes from when she was at Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, and learning about civil disobedience in a very real way. And then the death of Emmett Till, horrible, a 14-year-old boy, and wolf whistling at a white woman and being gouged and murdered and a body thrown in the Tallahatchie River. And the bravery of Emmett Till's mother to show the body in magazines touches her. And Adam Clayton Powell would come to Montgomery, and it touched her. And, there were other cases. We heard about Claudette Colvin, but other people were coming. So on December 1, 1955, she didn't wake up and this is my big day. She had bursitis in her arms, and she was working these steam presses at Montgomery Fair where you had to have pants like mine and press them before they were out. And she got off a little time-wise from her normal bus routine. It was Christmas. There was a Santa, Salvation Army thing, and they just were putting the Christmas decorations up. And she really got on the bus she didn't want to get onto because she wasn't riding James Blake's buses since 1943 when he left her in the rain. She went in and he made her go in the back and then left her on the side of the road. Blake, the driver of the famous December 1, 1955, was a neo-Confederate white supremacist. I went to track him down, and I couldn't get him to do an interview, so I showed up at his church he went to, and he wouldn't talk about it at this point in his life. But she thought he was mean, that all these other drivers, she got to know some of them that were okay. Not that she was okay with the system, but she humanized that driver's pretty nice, says hi, But Blake was just a nasty, rattlesnake.
Wait, didn't he curse you out when you tried to talk to him?
Yeah, he did.
It wasn't just that he didn't talk to you.
No, he was very ticked off that he was being bothered there at it. And she remembered him that this was a person that she had a kind of animosity towards for the way he treated, even within segregation, the way he treated African Americans.
And later, one of the other things I learned from your book, later at the show trial, it lasted, 5 minutes at the proceedings? He lied. He lied and said that there had been a vacant seat in the back of the bus, which was not true.
Blake was a bad guy. Honestly, a really just bad person. And, I think the hope was with him. I've been with John Lewis when he goes back to Montgomery every year with Faith and Politics, and he's hugged the police that have beat him, and this didn't happen with Blake. Just like George Wallace later said, I'm sorry for my sins later in life, Blake wasn't one of them. He was an unreconstructed white supremacist.
One of the other interesting details that I got from your book is that it wasn't just that Blake lied, that there were 2 white women who were called to the stand that the prosecutor somehow found. Both testified falsely that there had been an open seat to which Rosa Parks refused to move. And this is one of those painful moments that you recount in the book. One of the professors at Alabama State who worked with Parks at the local NAACP shook his head in disgust and whispered to E.D. Nixon, who'd returned to New York for the trial. He says, you can always find some damn white woman to lie.
Yeah, well, and not just that, one of the perils of doing history, I guess it's the fog of war, but I was in Montgomery, and, there were only so many people on the bus. These aren't large buses. If you go see it at the Henry Ford Museum, you can get an idea of the size. And I've met like 50 people supposedly that were on the bus. Half of Montgomery had some role, people do exaggerate different moments in history, and because that's such an iconic moment. But her also, as much as she was getting the right to vote in the 1940s, and was an activist in a real sense, as Jean just so well told us. She was an American who wanted to win World War II against fascism and beat the Nazis and beat the Japanese. And it sickened her when Sylvester, her brother, came home and in a uniform, and all African Americans coming, not all, but many coming back into southern communities were being spit on, beat, hazed. And here her brother didn't feel he could come back. He was a war hero. He was on Normandy picking up bodies from the beaches over there. Now he comes back, Sylvester, to Montgomery, and he's treated like dirt, and ended up, of course, going up to Detroit. And Rosa Parks, I had no children, and she loved Raymond, hence the Rosa and Raymond Park Institute. One of the things she told me when I was talking with her is to make sure that I don't make Raymond, because it was unusual for a man in that era in the African American community to allow his wife in this way, back to the misogyny.
Well, talk more about that. That's where I was going to go next. So talk more about Raymond and the role he played in her life. You tell this funny story how at the beginning, when Jean was talking about they would have the meetings with the guns on the table. At first, he didn't want her to come to the meetings because he said, you can't run fast enough if they come in here. So how did it go from that to him sort of?
He didn't have the nerve she had. I think we have to be careful of gender roles. Rosa Parks could be calm and collected. Raymond would be very nervous. And when the bomb threats were coming and the threats were coming on them, and Montgomery becomes a bit of a war zone, Raymond started drinking heavily and had difficulty with this. I sent Rosa Parks my manuscript to read, and I got back from her directly that there was one thing and I never do that with the subject, but I was so worried because I looked up to her and actually loved her, and I felt I don't want her not liking it or I blew something, so that she didn't have any right over it. I just said, proof it, tell me if I got something wrong, and her big change was that I had said Raymond had become an alcoholic. And she said, he was a heavy drinker. Don't use that word. Because that was a different generation used that word, and she didn't. And also today we say mixed race. Rosa Parks would use the word mulatto, which you don't use anymore. But she was very proud that everybody says I'm African American, but I'm also Creek, or I'm also Scots-Irish, and I'm like a mixture. Kind of an omni-American, as Albert Murray of Alabama talked about it.
Did she ever talk about how painful it was for her, that the episode in their life where Jean talked about, where after the boycott, like all the hellfire raining down upon her family and really on the community? I mean, you tell some great stories in the book. It's not just that, yes, it was ingenious how the community organized itself, but they constantly were having their insurance canceled. There were all these schemes to try to bust the boycott, which you also point out wasn't called a boycott because boycotts were illegal. It was called a protest. I mean, hellfire was raining down on
Really
her
was.
and her family. Did she ever talk to you about that period
but
and how she
of course,
dealt with it?
and she talked to a number of people about that. But I just want to let you realize that she had a lot of joy. It just wasn't angry. I mean, she would laugh about things that went on during all of this, and somebody on a bicycle, and like remember the funny, weird stories, because they were in a protest. They were humans. They just weren't in outrage every minute, you know. And but the bomb threats there, and the fact that she had to get out of Montgomery and leave the home, she had gotten fed up. But as Jean just said, once she got to Detroit, it wasn't the promised land, as she put it. I mean, you know, that Virginia Park area, they put construction of highways there. The schools were segregated. You know, this isn't just an Alabama problem on racism. Detroit had racism that she had to encounter there, and Sylvester had to encounter. And she survived because of a sense of humor. And what I've appreciated about Jean's work that's very pioneering in my view is her bringing together, which I had missed when I had done this, and Jean got it and I didn't, the idea with her working with women and rape survivors. I just didn't find the trail of it, but it's all there, and I just missed it when I did it. But that is another side of the feminism of Rosa Parks. She would tell me about things like at the March on Washington, not being able to be a speaker. She didn't like public speaking. She wasn't looking forward to she really didn't like celebrityhood in any meaningful way, but she was offended that women weren't given a real role on the famous March on Washington in jobs. It wasn't about her, it's just let's elevate the women. And that's a big part of her too. And so the women's movement thoughts, and so like as mentioned with the photos in the exhibit here of Angela Davis and Shirley Chisholm mean a lot to me, that she's backing a Shirley Chisholm to be president.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. We're having a Vulcan mind meld here, because I was going to ask you, are there aspects of or are there particular artifacts in the exhibition that particularly moved you, given that you had this time with her that so many of us wish we had had but didn't have?
Well, anytime I see her face, it's just so striking. I mean, if you're a photographer, it's just something about her look and then the aura. I noticed when people would realize it was Rosa Parks, I'm sure has experienced this more than me, but when she was in a wheelchair with her bun, and people would suddenly realize there's Rosa Parks, they couldn't almost talk. And sometimes in an AME church, people would just want to touch her. It's just like, you're real. I've heard about, I'm in the African American community in particular. But, you know, she was very also into Nelson Mandela. I interviewed Bishop Tutu and people like this, and how in Africa, Rosa Parks became a big figure. It wasn't just in the United States. And in fact, in 1990, when Nelson Mandela got released from the Robben Island prison, and he got, with Winnie Mandela, they got to come to the United States. Strom Thurmond had them, you know, they were coming here in Washington, and George Herbert Walker Bush was seeing them. But she was in Detroit, and he wanted Mandela to go see his hero boxer, Joe Louis, and meet Rosa Parks in Detroit. And he flew to Detroit, Wayne County Airport, Mandela, but nobody had invited Rosa Parks. Even though he had said Mandela, he'd love to see Rosa Parks. It got mixed in a snafu, and this part of her is demure. Damon Keith, the federal judge there in Detroit, said, "Bro, you're coming with me." And she goes, "No, I didn't get an invite. I'm not trying to like hog Mandela's time." And she's like, he said he wanted to see you. She goes, "But nobody gave me an official invitation." He goes, "You're invited." And they got in a heated argument, which only somebody her age. They were the same age, and he was a judge. And he said, "You're coming." And they finally got there, and she kept saying, he was in the wheelchair, and she's like, "I don't want to go up front. I'm not trying to get attention." She's just so worried that that's the way. But she got up there and just sitting, and Mandela comes down out of the airport, and she's like in the front, and he's doing like saying they're selling Mandela T-shirts and Swahili words for power. It's like a big deal. And he just walking and waving, he's going like this and comes down a carpet they had there and is walking, and suddenly his eyes fixed on Rosa Parks sitting there, and he just stood and tears started swelling up in Mandela's face, and he tried to talk, and he just goes, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks. And people there started chanting her name when they had forgotten her. And then they came and hugged each other on this embrace of somebody fighting Jim Crow, hatred in America, somebody fighting apartheid, and they're both of the same graying generation embracing each other there at the Detroit airport.
What did she think about that? The fact that she became a person whose name was chanted, the fact that she was a person who could render people speechless, a person who, as a child, felt a little white boy could push her off the sidewalk just because she was there. Did she ever talk to you about that?
Yeah, but she was somebody, honestly, who didn't need to be famous in her mind. She loved kids. She loved children. And one of the times I went with her to a middle school up in Detroit where she was doing a program to teach middle school kids how to do, middle school kids going to senior assisted living people and teaching the elders how to do email and how to use. So it was a way to empower the young person and also heal generations that an older person would be talking to a younger person instead of boxing off like generationally. So education was big. The Underground Railroad, it was her lifetime fascination, and anything about Harriet Tubman in particular really caught her fancy, and she learned about the system of the Underground Railroad and the lore of it. Now they built a museum in Cincinnati for the Underground Railroad and all, but when she was starting to want children to really learn that Underground Railroad history.
You're sort of redirecting us here, because it's interesting, because I keep wanting to kind of push her back onto the Black History Month calendar, right? And you're bringing her back down to us and the work that still needs to be done. And it sounds like she was always doing the work. While I have you, I don't want to let my profession off the hook. I mean, you tell some really disturbing stories about the way journalists treated her. In San Francisco in particular, you write about how when she was on the speaking tour that Professor Theoharis talked about, while the bus boycott was going on, there was this one reporter in San Francisco who asked her if she was a prostitute, who basically told her he was going to rip her to shreds. And it was the one time in the book you talk about how she was crying, that it made her cry.
Yeah. That's when she toured around the country after her big moment, December 1st of 55 and into 1956, she would go to Seattle and New York and had to become like a spokesperson for things. But the hatred, guys, is so real. I last week was with Hank Aaron, the baseball great in Atlanta, where we've dedicated a building to Hank Aaron, and I gave a historian speech where they did a ribbon cutting for a Atlanta technical building. You guys should see the mail Hank Aaron got for baiting Babe Ruth. I mean, the most vile letters of a hatred you can imagine. Rosa and Raymond had to endure that hellfire, as you put, of just hatred and bigotry. But she knew, like Mandela, Bill Clinton, I interviewed not long ago about Mandela, and he basically said when he was going through his impeachment ordeal, he talked to Mandela and he said, did you despise your jailers? Did you hate your jailers? You're in jail for, decades. And he said, I despised them for a week, Mandela said. And I just was so angry at them when I finally got out. And then I realized they still owned me. And if I didn't let go, I wouldn't be free. Rosa Parks was free. She died a free person. Nobody owned her. She did it through a combination of things: social grassroots activism encouraged by young people, the AME Church and the teachings of Christ, Buddhism, vegan lifestyle. There are a lot of components to it, but this is not somebody who felt, she transcended hatred with her brand of love, and that's why she's a figure that people are so drawn to.
What's your best memory of her? Just the two of you.
you know, I think we forget she's Southern in the sense because she has a Southern accent, and she's her fondness for place and people, like her, even though Detroit had all these problems and her being beaten in her own home. And, you know, I mean, a horrible story. I don't think we have time for it all. But, I mean, she was beaten terribly and rushed to a receiving hospital and all the deprivations of her life. But she'd find what was good and great in Detroit. I remember her telling me she'd listen to records. She liked I think she loved Dr. King's voice and his speaking. Motown Records, in addition to doing Stevie Wonder and you know, the Temptations and the all up there in Hitsville, USA, did a record of Dr. King's Cobo Arena speech where he tried out I Have a Dream before the here, and she would play that a lot. She liked listening to King's sermons, but also Sam Cooke and the music of Sam Cooke. And when King was assassinated, she'd listen to Sam Cooke. It kind of healed some of that sort of music she felt as a curative to heal her. And then the great work she did for John Conyers, the great congressperson there. Everybody wanted to meet her, and what she wanted to meet were the young kids who wanted to be with her and talk to her, and that brought her joy. I think my wife talked to her when our baby Benton was born. She got a real thing about children that had been with her as a consistent through her life, the sanctity of childhood.
Did she get to read the book? You did. You sent
She
her
did.
the draft.
She read
did she
it all.
like it? What did she say?
That's the only thing. She said you did a nice job, but you got to get rid of that about Raymond. She felt I needed to amplify her husband in the sense that he had to, like, she was leaving. And he had to keep the book, you know, it was a role reversal.
She loved him. She
loved him.
And she admired him.
She loved him, admired him, and she loved all of her nieces and nephews and extended family in Detroit and beyond, and loved her friend set, Johnny May Carr, who we haven't mentioned down in Montgomery, who was something else in real life, and she loved Johnny May Carr. They were like this, and they had all these micro memories. And I thought what Jean said so moving to me was, she put it somehow like we think of like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, and just how down home it was in Montgomery there with the food and the culture and the friendships, and she would dress perfectly. I mean, Claudette Colvin's story's different, but Rosa Parks didn't swear and curse, and she would wear her best clothes. So when she's arrested, people in Montgomery were in the African American community and some in the white community, but they would say, they arrested who? Rosa Parks, the most angelic, you know, wonderful. Yes, she's an addict. They're fingerprinting her, and it united her. The symbol of her helped unite the country. And then in a fluke of history, Dr. King became the leader because Reverend Ralph Abernathy had been around there too long and made some enemies. And King was the new preacher in town, and he got the assignment, and wow. You had the combo will be linked in history, and she was much older. She was 42, and Dr. King's in his 20s still.
And he was cute.
And he was cute.
But Professor Theoharis gave us kind of a charge, and I know that you all occupy sort of different spaces in the world, and I don't know if you feel comfortable doing that, but I would, before we let you go, do you want to give us a charge based on the knowledge of her, based on the time you spent together, based on your understanding of who she was? What would Rosa Parks want us to be thinking about tonight?
Love your family, love people, the gospel of love, but also fight, be activist. Don't allow oppression and injustice or social inequity. She was both. She was a sweet, loving human person, and if you treated her with respect, she would treat you. She never in her life treated anybody with disrespect if they were respectful in any way, shape, or form to her. But if you crossed her and you were disrespectful, there was this fighter in her, and she was indomitable in that. Because in the end, Rosa Parks knew who she was. She didn't have to worry about like fame and this. She never lost her internal spirit. So get involved, vote. She wants young people to vote. She wants people to be engaged in democracy. She wants to believe that you can make change. And I do think that she'd be happy to see these women's marches. I'm sure, even in a wheelchair, she would have tried to be at a Million Women March for women's rights. Think of her not just as civil rights figure, human rights figure, but somebody who loved democracy and the possibilities of it, and somebody who thought in global terms and saw the oppression of people of color everywhere in the world.
Douglas Brinkley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Doug, I'm sorry for post-dating your book.
That's okay.
Thank you for your insightful conversation. You've given us so much to think about as we leave. But before we do, I want to bring Adrienne Cannon back to the stage. And Jean, if you wouldn't mind joining us as well. We have a very special gift from you all, for you all from the library.
So I guess we should, okay. Oh, boy.
Voila.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
Wow.
Cool.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
Tell them what it is.
This is,
It's amazing.
I consider it to be the standout piece in the collection. And it's an example of Rosa Parks' personal writings. It's a rich array that include autobiographical sketches and notes and notebooks and spiritual reflections and prayers. And I call these notes. And in the notes, she describes her arrest on December the 1st, 1955. She actually reflects on the arrest. On the first page that's written in ink, she describes the arrest, and she says, "I had been pushed around all my life, and I felt at this moment I couldn't take it anymore. When I asked the policeman why we had to be pushed around, he said, he didn't know. The law is a law. You are under arrest." And those are the words that Jean said earlier. And it was a familiar refrain that she repeated in print interviews and film interviews, that she writes confidently in pen because she knew what she was going to say. Now, in the next 3 pages, you'll notice that they're written in pencil. These next 3 pages, she describes the effect that that arrest had on her. And I think she wrote in pencil because she was dealing with her feelings. She was vulnerable. She didn't know what she was going to say. And when you write in pencil about your feelings, if you say something that you think is too much, you always have the comfort of knowing that you can erase it, that you can take it back. And so she goes into a whole new territory exploring these feelings. And I think on the second page, she recounts her brief incarceration in the Montgomery City Jail. She writes in Quiet Strength, her book Quiet Strength, that she's first put in a small room with bars before she's transferred to the cell with the 2 other women. And she says, next, I felt that I had been deserted, but I did not cry. I said a silent prayer and I waited. And then she continues on the second page, I want to feel the nearness of something secure. It is such a lonely, lost feeling that I am cut off from life. I am nothing. I belong nowhere and to no one. Then she describes the personal toll of living under Jim Crow racism. Again, on the second page, and as we go further down, she says, there is so much hurt, disappointment, and oppression one can take. The bubble of life grows larger. The line between reason and madness grows thinner. And finally, she considers the broader impact of what she says the criminal Jim Crow has done to one life multiplied millions of times over these United States and the world. He walks us on a tightrope. Little children are so conditioned early in the segregated pattern as they take their first toddling steps and are weaned from the mother's breast. And she ends these set of notes with an image that evokes the special nurturing relationship that she had with children. And I think that the notes are significant because they crystallize the bus arrest, which is the defining moment in her life, her iconic status as the mother of the modern civil rights movement, but simultaneously they remind us that she is a woman, that she is human, that she is vulnerable, that she is like us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a nice gift. That's tremendous.
Thank you, Adrian. Can we have another round of applause for Jean, Michael, Michelle?
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We have one for each of you, so they'll be mailed to your home.
Thank you
Perfect.
very
Thank you.
much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Before you go, please remember that Jean and Doug will be signing their Rosa Parks books in the room next door. I hope you enjoyed our National Book Festival Presents program and that you will return on March 12th for a memorable conversation between Margaret Atwood and Nan Talese. And please look for our announcement on February 19th when we will have news about an exciting new programming series happening every Thursday night. For more information about our programs, go to loc.gov. Thank you so much.
This is awesome, isn't it? It's awesome. They did a beautiful job.
I'm sorry for your name. I'm reading so many things. I'm so used to hearing your voice.
Put that on the wall next to it.